Thank you. Hi, welcome. So normally talks start with this awesome outline with an introduction and then some smart structure and a clever conclusion. It's going to be a bit different. I'm just going to talk about privacy breaches, basically. So I'm going to go over a bunch of news items, and let's try to also deduce some privacy lessons from that. Who am I? I am I actually started as a security researcher. I accidentally rolled into privacy. I found out that I love that domain. I still like all of you. But privacy is really, it's newer, so there's even more to discover. But I love that interaction between privacy and security. So I'm very thrilled to now be a cyber and privacy manager at PwC Belgium, where I actually can work on both. And on that intersection, I work in a very nice team with some awesome cyber privacy and resilience experts. You will see that I love to talk about this stuff, so feel free to connect with me on any of those things. I also created, I did a lot of things. I created the Linden threat modeling framework. I co-authored the threat modeling manifesto, and a lot of other things. But let's talk about those examples. Let's start with a kind of a small thing that I don't think many people saw in the news. And it was a Canadian example, if I remember correctly, about vending machines on a college campus. And that vending machine showed this picture at some point. I don't know if you can read it. It's a bit blurry. But basically what it says here is there's an error in the facial recognition app for a vending machine. So the students were like, what is this? So they went to administration. Administration reached out to the vending machine company. And they said, no worries. It's all good. Our lawyer said it's okay. It's fine, yes, we're processing faces, but it's anonymous. I mean, we're just processing faces. It's not like we're doing much except for also collecting some demographics. I think there's a lot of things wrong with the statement, but they said it's fine. It's GDPR compliant, the lawyer said so. We're not actually processing personal identifiable information, which is a bit weird because biometrics are considered a sensitive personal information type. So I think the first lesson we can learn here is that compliance is very much overrated. The lawyers will not make systems privacy respecting. They can sign off. We can argue about whether or not that was actually a good sign off. I have my doubts, but fine. What is important is that we build systems with privacy in mind and security in mind. That means that we will need to engineer the feature, the product, the system with those privacy and security mindsets. So we need privacy engineering just like we need security engineering. Okay, that was a small one to get started. A completely different topic, menstruation tracking apps. What does that have to do with privacy? Good question. The femtech business is apparently a really booming business. Lots of women use it. What's the big deal? It's this normal, natural, recurring cycle. Well, true. And then there was Roe versus Wade. 2 years ago was overturned. For those who missed it, it means that, I'm giving this presentation usually in Europe where they don't know this, but I guess most of you do know this. So in many states here in the US, abortion is considered illegal. So that caused these type of headlines saying, be careful when you use this type of applications because maybe this thing can be used to actually prove that you had an abortion because there are some gaps in that cycle. So as users, make sure that you know how your data is being used. And as an application developer, make sure you think about your users. Make sure that you minimize the information. And it actually triggered some of these application providers to, for instance, allow for anonymous use. So what can we learn from this? Well, one of the key concepts for privacy is not confidentiality, what a lot of people think, but one of the key concepts is actually unlinkability. Unlinkability means, well, actually linking means that you are connecting bits and pieces of information. It's a bit like playing the game Guess Who? You start with this big set of information, lots of people, and you start asking questions. Is the person a man? Is the person wearing glasses? Is the person having dark hair? All on their own, it doesn't reveal much information, but if you combine those bits and pieces of information together, the anonymity set reduces and people can become identifiable. That's one type of linking, but the example of the abortion proof, that's another type of linking. So a lot of information can be deduced. And from a privacy perspective, as an individual, we want to be able to deny. I mean, we don't want proof about things that we did today, yesterday, or what we did last summer. So, repeating myself, but it's important because lots of people don't get this. It's not a synonym for confidentiality. Privacy is a different thing, and one of the key concepts there is unlinkability, which means that it's important to minimize your information as much as possible. There's also another lesson here to be learned from this example, and that is basically that privacy analysis is not so straightforward, because privacy is quite a complex topic. It's newer than security, so we still need to figure out some things, but it's actually just also a complex domain. It has several layers to it. The first thing that you do, you want to build a feature, so you're going to analyze that specific feature from a technical perspective. You're going to look at the privacy implications. That feature doesn't live in isolation. It lives and connects in a broader system, even ecosystem. There's third-party services that are connected to it. You also need to take that into account, but because that also has privacy implications. But it goes beyond that. You also need to take into account the broader business context. Because a feature that you build, for instance, to process medical information, if that feature is used in a hospital context to help patients in that business context, that's a completely different story than if exactly that same feature, processing exactly the same data, is being used in some weird social media applications, for instance. So the same feature has completely different privacy implications depending on the business context. And that also means you need to take into account the broader environment. Where is it being deployed? Is it in the US? Is it in Europe? What are the expectations of your users? Who are your users? So all of that is important, and you need to consider to do a proper, thorough privacy analysis. So in summary, context matters. Understand your audience, understand the expectations. And that means that you should look for a diverse team with diverse viewpoints. Okay. I think you all saw this example a couple of years ago. So Strava said, well, we're going to release some completely anonymous information because we aggregated everything. There's nothing you can deduce from this. And that's true on a personal level. But then these type of things showed up, revealing very sensitive information for certain groups of people, like military bases. And this is just one example of how location information is really difficult, or personal information in general is really difficult to properly anonymize or de-identify. Strava also, on a personal level, has some privacy perimeter you can set. So you can basically say, hide my start and end location, so people cannot know where I live or where I work. Researchers showed that if you just have 3 of those runs or bike rides or whatever, you can still easily pinpoint that precise location. Similar story about location-based dating apps. Same researchers showed that if you move around and you target one individual just by having 3 different points, you can still pinpoint the location of that person. And that means that if you are looking at privacy on this online application, that actually has also an impact on physical safety. So those privacy implications, they go beyond the fines, the compliance, the reputation damage. You really need to look at the broader picture. Several options, solutions have been proposed. There's a lot of interesting research going on. One of those exciting solutions is synthetic data. So you basically push the original data into some AI thing, and that brings out some made-up data. It looks real, but it is designed in a way that it's just far enough away from the original. So you can use it as if it was real, but it's fake. And that sounds great in theory, but there's some issues. This is already a bit of an old example, but I think it pretty much shows the problem. See, all the blue ones are generated, but even if you would remove the original one, it's kind of obvious, right, where the original data point was. So in summary, the identification is not easy. We often see people going for, okay, well, that personal information, let's just anonymize and it fixes all our privacy problems. In theory, that sounds great. In practice, it is not. First of all, you cannot anonymize everything because some of the data you actually need to use. But also, currently, the techniques are still not as mature, and you kind of need to be a crypto expert to pull that off properly, so don't go inventing your own. There are libraries there. There's new ones popping up almost daily. It's an ongoing research domain, but it's still not something that will fix all your problems. Okay. This was from about, well, just before summer. NOYB, none of your business. It's kind of a privacy rights organization in Europe, co-founded by Max Schrems. I'm going to talk about the guy a bit later. I don't know how familiar you are with him. He's kind of a privacy activist in Europe. They urged a number of DPAs, data protection authorities, so the people who fine for privacy rights, among others, in each European country, to stop Meta for abusing personal data for AI. What happened in June, there was this a bit of hidden update of Meta's privacy policy that said, well, you know what, end of June, we're going to start using all of your information, and we're going to use it to train our AI models. And that includes like personal images, videos, posts, everything, also kids, deceased people, artwork. We're going to use everything. If you do nothing, you agree. If you really don't want to agree, okay, fine, we're going to allow you to object. And with some search, you could find this objection form where you had to fill in a number of reasons why you think Meta shouldn't be processing your information. And if you filled it in, then you got this message like, we'll get back to you. So within the privacy world, that caused some issues, but among others, because of NOYB was making that big of a fuss about it, Meta decided to stop AI training for EU user data. So all of you, you're still in there. We're for now safe. So key takeaway here is that you cannot just reuse information that you have. Even if you have it, you need to have, well, it needs to be in line with the original purpose. If it was collected to, I don't know, share with your friends, then you cannot reuse it to train it and to create new content with it. It needs to be in line with the original purpose. Also, maybe, well, that was for me an interesting one. When I made that switch from security to privacy, if you want to make a data protection lawyer's eyes twitch, then you need to start talking about ownership. So in this whole discussion, you can say like, well, yeah, we're the company, we have the data, we own the data, right? We can do whatever we want with it. Well, ownership doesn't exist in privacy terms or in compliance terms. We have data subjects, controllers, and processors. So the organization is the controller because they determine the purpose. You can also have subcontractors, which are processors. They also need to make sure that they've done due diligence, but the controller is basically the end responsible. And then you have the data subject, the individual that is being described in the personal data. They're also not the owner. It's not because it's data about you that you own it. It just means that you are the data subject, and that gives you a number of rights. But it's not ownership as we know in security. Okay, so Meta stopped that use for AI in Europe. Last week on my LinkedIn feed, I kept seeing these things coming by. So as the privacy geek that I am, immediately I went to see my settings, and I couldn't find it. And actually, LinkedIn learned from Meta. We're going to do this, but not for people within the EU and the UK. Or so they say. So takeaway here is, in addition to that unlinkability requirement that I was talking about before, these are two other key requirements, goals that you need to have in mind when you're talking about privacy. That's transparency, making sure that as an individual you know what's going to happen with that information, not hide it somewhere in some obscure privacy policy like we just saw. And intervenability, giving control, giving empowerment to the individual so that they can tweak and request more information, opt out, well, preferably opt in, give power to the individuals. I want to keep talking about Meta because from a privacy perspective, they're a really great company to use as example. About a year ago, they got a really, really big fine of over 1 billion euros or dollars. And it's actually this long process that goes back almost 10 years, because until 10 years ago, there was this thing called safe harbor, which is this legal framework that allows you, if you comply to certain requirements, to share European data to the US. Max Schrems, remember, the privacy activist, went to the European Court of Justice saying, that doesn't sound right. It's violating a lot of things, like the surveillance legislation in the US makes this not great for Europeans. And the Court of Justice says, you're right, we cannot do it any longer. So Europe and the US sat together, made this new legal framework. In 2020, Max Schrems, well, before that, but the court ruled in 2020 saying, yeah, you're right, it's not good enough. So since 2020, there wasn't actually a legal framework. So US companies relied on this thing called standard contractual clauses, which now is ruled to not be sufficient because it didn't properly protect EU citizens. After this, there has been a new update, the data privacy framework, that is currently approved, but Schrems already said, I'm going to look into this. So we basically have no clue what to do. You need to be a data transfer expert to do this. I mean, I have colleagues who focus exactly on that, doing transfer impact assessments. So I would say handle with care. That's about a lot of these things. Also, the AI Act now has some rules that sound great, but nobody actually knows what it means or how to do it, or technology isn't ready for it. So yeah, handle with care, avoid if you can, basically. I think it's the final one about Meta. They also had another fine of about 400 million euros. because they used personal data for personalized advertisement. So Europe ruled that you cannot do this. Fine, I guess they paid. I didn't check. So that was in January 2023. In November 2023, Facebook and Instagram came with this new service. They said, you know, we're going to do you guys a favor. We're going to offer you the choice to pay us. If you don't want to have this stuff, just pay us and we're not going to use it, or at least not specifically for this thing. And otherwise, you know, we care. You can still use our services. Well, a lot of months went over. Again, NOYB did this study saying, well, you guys, this isn't great. If you just look at I think they did this calculation for a couple of European countries looking at the top 100 websites. If they just selected a percentage of that, then you would come to the 1,500 euros per year for just those couple of websites. So you say, like, this isn't possible. If we are going to allow this, well, we're doomed. So eventually, the European data protection body said, yeah, no, the pay or okay model is really not okay. So that's no longer allowed. I actually don't know if they stopped the service. So in summary, if you violate these privacy regulations, it can result in some hefty fines. So better be safe than sorry. And I have been talking a lot about Meta. And Meta and Google and the big ones are typically being targeted because they make great examples. But that doesn't mean that it will never happen to a small company. So I'm going to refer to a local example from a couple of weeks ago. We have a company called Mediahuis. That's kind of a parent organization for, I think, 4 local news sites. And the Belgian DPA imposes a daily fine of 25,000 euros because they use dark patterns. I don't know how familiar you are with the concept of dark patterns or deceptive patterns. I'm just going to illustrate with the screenshots from the official decision by the DPA. So one of the things that all those news sites did was, well, we have those cookie pop-up banners. It's in Dutch. I'm going to translate. So we have the more information grayed out and the agree and close in bright red colors. So we all know this stuff. We don't read it. This looks boring. We're not going to check it out. This has like a bright color, so just click on it and move on. Also, it's in red, so it looks like we're saying no. So they argued this is deceptive. Also, this one says okay. This one says I want to know more. So there's this imbalance because you need to click on more information before you actually, in the second layer, can say I don't agree. So the reject versus consent has this imbalance, so that's also not sufficient. There were a couple of other similar things that they did wrong according to the DPA. So now they have 40-something days to fix this, and if they didn't, then those daily fines will be charged. So, repeating what I said for Meta, if you don't follow regulations, that can still result in quite hefty fines. It's basically up to, I had this on my previous slide, I need to go look because I don't remember by heart. Where is it? Yes, either if you talk about GDPR, it goes up to 20 million euros or 4% of the annual global turnover of the organization that you can get privacy-specific fines. So that can be quite hefty. And avoid those dark patterns. The European Data Protection Board has also written some guidance on that. If you really want to nudge your users, well, then nudge them in a way that they make a privacy-friendly decision. Okay, Completely different example, Pokemon Go. It's already a bit of an old one. So when Pokemon Go first came in the app stores, there was this headline. What happened was they didn't quite think this through. They put these Pokemon in parks, but also in private properties. So a lot of people were starting to complain, like, there's a bunch of people on my lawn. What are they doing here? So this is to illustrate that privacy is a broader concept than just that data privacy, that online privacy. This is actually a taxonomy of privacy, and you see there's intrusion, there's interrogation, surveillance, blackmail, lots of other things. So if you really want to look at privacy as a whole, it goes even more beyond that. And I want to use the Pokemon example because now it sounds really cool to my son. So there you go. Privacy can also have an impact beyond the online world. So again, it's important. I keep referring back to it, but context is really essential from a privacy perspective. You need to understand the whole picture. A bit of an oldie, Ashley Madison. It's hyped up again because there's plenty of new documentaries about it. And it's considered a typical security breach. Yet there's also the privacy part here. First of all, well, yeah, some of the headlines saying, well, there's people actually being impacted by this. So it has that bigger impact than just, oh my God, my personal information from as an organization perspective is being stolen or violated. It has an impact on the people. What actually is the privacy part behind this is, yes, there were hackers or whatever. There was a breach. There weren't hackers. No. There was a breach. But the privacy part of it is that the fallout could have been much less because it was created by design to just keep all the information. If people wanted to sign out, their accounts would still be stored. You had to register as a premium user to sign out and get your data deleted. And even then they said, we're not going to do it anyway. So if they had deleted everything, there would have been much less information being leaked and much less people being impacted. So use this as a driver. Well, it's not actually what if, it's when. If there's something going wrong, if you actually invest in privacy, the impact of that breach will be less because less data, we're gonna have less impact. Next, well, another lesson learned is privacy should be done by default. So having people pay for it doesn't make sense. The previous example, opt-out versus opt-in, it should always be opt-in. It should not be a question of having people look for some hidden button to say, well, I don't want this to happen. No, do the privacy, most privacy-friendly part. And here also minimality is key. Okay, next example. Cars. A lot of things, a lot of information is being collected by cars. There was this study by Mozilla a year ago. They looked at privacy notices of modern cars. And they have this whole list of information that is being collected by cars. Name, address, phone number, sure, we give that when we buy a car. Driving habit, driving style, acceleration, location history, sure. Improve like personal usability, I don't know. But the list continues. There's marital status, race, education, medical information, genetic information, audio recordings, pictures, gait, sleep data, sexual data, religion, and so on and so on and so on. And this is just a snippet. The list is very long. So I'm just going to let this sink in. This is the stuff your car can collect about you. And maybe you're like, yeah, fine, whatever. We trust the car company. Well, maybe you shouldn't, because a bit before that, in the news that Tesla workers were having a lot of fun looking at car cameras of their customers, and we're seeing some scenes of intimacy and sharing that among each other. This is actually, this study of Mozilla is based on privacy notices, so that's the information that the car company writes in those boring legal documents. But it's also actually being used in practice. There was this very recent article about this patent being requested, saying that we're gonna listen to all conversations in cars, we're gonna check the keywords, and that's the stuff we're gonna use to give you targeted advertisement in your vehicle. There was also, a couple of months ago, a number of articles in the New York Times by a well-known privacy technical reporter saying, well, apparently certain brands of cars are selling all that information, the way you drive, to your insurance company. That same researcher, Kashmir Hill, posted a bit after she published this, like, oh my God, this stuff happened to me too. And I looked into it, and apparently the salespeople had had to basically convince their customers to do that. So they hid the consent file in that bunch of documents that you had to sign when you buy a car. So, well, I can say a lot of things that are wrong here, but summary is those three protection goals that I mentioned before. These are the essential goals that we should strive for, and typically all three of them are missing in current applications, systems. So we need to strive for transparency, inform the individuals. We need to strive for intervenability, giving empowerment, giving control to the individuals, and especially unlinkability, minimizing the information that you have. So again, I cannot repeat this enough. Confidentiality is important, but privacy goes far beyond that. I don't know if you guys saw this. This was also in June in the news. So Microsoft is launching something new called Recall, and on certain PCs, the new Copilot Plus PCs, they're gonna do snapshots of your screen every couple of seconds. But it's fine because all those snapshots are being stored on a secure local database. So perfectly fine. Like 1 day later, there was this thing saying, well, no, it's completely not fine. And that's true. There's a lot of security issues there because it wasn't secure. But it also has privacy implications because, well, if you use that at home, typically people just have one account. That means that you can see what your kids or your partner are doing. That also means that those snapshots are being shared, which can have an impact on, well, let's say, domestic abuse situations. In addition, yes, it's currently stored locally, but that's today. There's no, well, there's a promise, but there's no guarantee that Microsoft is not going to say tomorrow, well, you know, it's going to be easier to store this in the cloud, and let's do some processing on this. So in addition to fixing the local database, there's a lot of privacy implications too. So this caused some hype in the security world. So, well, I showed that as the previous slide. It quite quickly, they were saying, well, we're going to switch this off. We're not going to do it. That was in June. In August, they said, well, no, we're going to do it anyway. But not in summer. We're going to wait till October. But it's fine. Security remains our top priority. So let's see what happens. As I was just explaining, it's not just about security. We also need privacy. So there's some issues there. How am I doing on time? Okay, good. Final example, I think. Yes. I came across this post a couple of months ago. So I had tipped to Carrie Lenning, privacy professional in my network. She was looking into this Calmara app, very weird application that says, just send pictures of the private parts of your partner or fling, and we're going to say whether it's safe or whether they have STIs. Yeah.
What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, exactly. But so they say, you know what? We care. So we want to make sure that that we have consent. So how will we capture consent of your partner? Well, we just say press the big ping button. So we know it's fine. Also, well, it's very sensitive information, right? They fix it. They use AWS Cloud Magic, and now it's HIPAA compliant. It works. So lots of things can be learned here. I'm going to try to keep it positive and say, well, privacy-enhancing technologies, PETs, are typically seen as we're going to use de-identification techniques, k-anonymity, differential privacy, that's synthetic data. And when we have this privacy issue, we're going to throw it at the application, and it's going to fix everything, like sprinkle it down as some magic crypto dust. Well, it's not going to be enough here, right? This is a great example of where we need to have privacy, security, just common sense maybe too, at the early stages of design time. So just as a kind of high-level summary of stuff that you should be doing when you're including privacy in your design, a number of mitigations and controls that you can and should be implementing. I categorized it according to those three protection goals. So for unlinkability, it's about minimality. And that actually can be separated into two parts. Minimizing, reducing personal data. I've said it before, I'm going to repeat it. If you don't need it, don't store it, don't collect it, don't process it. That's the obvious thing. If you do need to collect it, then, well, maybe you can separate it. You can separate the direct identifiers in a different database and have pseudonymous data that you will use throughout your application. You can do de-identification techniques, aggregate data, abstract data, data retention policies. If you don't need it anymore, remove it. There's even some retention policies that say if we keep it for a long time, after a while, we will start aggregating so that we can still have generic, aggregated processing, but we don't keep the raw data anymore. That's about the data. We also want to minimize the processing. So I talked about this in the previous examples. Make sure you have whether your purpose is compatible with the original collection purpose. Don't just use data for training models if you have collected the data for a completely different purpose. Transparency, that's informing the individual. That's typically associated with the privacy notices, the boring legalese text that nobody reads. FYI, it shouldn't be like that. It should be actually understandable, easy, clear. There is this interesting new research domain called transparency-enhancing technologies that is focusing on extracting these notices based on architecture, on code, to make sure that legalese that is typically written down at ideation phase and doesn't reflect at all the system is actually up to date. So that's kind of interesting. The deceptive patterns, the dark patterns, that's something that also the UX, the UI people need to know. If you nudge people, then make sure it's to do good and not to get them to share a lot of information with you that you actually don't have the right to have. And then there's the intervenability, control, empowerment. a lot of times the legal basis to process personal information is going to come down to consent. So that means that you need to have consent management. You need to be able to properly collect, store consent, update consent, because users can revoke the consent, have that stuff ideally integrated with your access control rules. Also, there's a bunch of data subject rights. So as an individual, at least I'm talking about Europe and GDPR, as an individual, I have the right to have access to my information. So each organization that is collecting, processing, storing my personal information, I can reach out to them, and they have to give me the full batch of information they have on me within reasonable time, I think about a month. That means that your system needs to be able to collect all that information. So you need to have proper data inventory, data management, to be able to do that. I can also ask for updates. I can also ask for deletion. And there's anyway the data retention period that you need to be able to fulfill. So there needs to be a way to delete data of a specific person. And it's not just deleting the information in the database. You also need to think about log files. You also need to think about backups, because if you restore, then you need to be sure that the data is actually still deleted. So lots of interesting engineering challenges there still to be tackled and to be implemented by your developers. So the story continued with Kalmara, and it was being shut down, not just for privacy, but also because the FTC said, well, the stuff you're promising, there's no proof that it actually does anything. So I think that's a great thing, and I think the final lesson learned here is that we security and privacy people, we're really cool, and we can do a lot of things, but we can't fix anything, fix everything. There's some ideas that shouldn't be brought into production. So, to conclude, some summary of the lessons learned. First of all, privacy is an interesting topic. I love it. I hope I have convinced you that this is actually well, not the boring thing that people tend to think is that boring lawyer thing. It has so many interesting engineering challenges for designers, architects, developers, and so on. And it is important, because think about what happens if you don't and things go wrong. The fallout will be much bigger. Final time, I'm going to repeat it. Privacy goes beyond confidentiality. It's about unlinkability. It's about transparency. It's about intervenability. Privacy-enhancing technologies are really cool, but they're not going to fix everything. It's not something that you can sprinkle on at the end. You know that. It's the same for security. We need to have that built in by design, have privacy engineering. And context matters. Privacy goes beyond a technical analysis. You really need to understand the business context, the environment context. And having said all of this, it may sound scary, like, oh, this sounds like a lot of things we need to keep into account. And if you want to do it completely, properly, similar for security, it's a lot of work. Start small and evolve. If you do something, just ask yourself that question whenever you start processing personal information. Do I really need to have this? Can I do this in a different way? That's the first question, and that gets you going, and then you can extend your privacy practices on that. Start small, evolve, and see what makes sense for your organization, same as you do for security. All right, lessons learned from privacy. I think we have like 2 minutes left for questions. Questions? Yes, Tanya.
So as a person who is a consumer, what can I do when I am getting screwed by our, I don't know what else to say, right? So like every single company's like, PS, we're turning AI on to whether you like it or not. What power do I have other than throwing my phone and computer into a lake?
I think that's a great question, and I don't have the answer for the US. So in Europe, we can go to the Data Protection Authority and say, like, this isn't working, or we can go to an OIB who kind of files complaints for individuals.
What about Canada? I mean,
Yeah, they should have something like that because they are very nicely regulated for privacy. But there's gonna be data protection authorities there too.
So
Yeah.
go to them and tattle.
Basically, yeah.
I'm pro-tattling.
Yeah, well, in this case, sometimes we have to, right? And that brings up the awareness, and that hopefully, well, gets the field evolved. And let's see also for the deceptive, the dark patterns, what will happen because of those fines, yeah.
To add on to that, I did make a complaint to the Privacy Commissioner.
Okay.
When I got an email, I have a medical condition, and they emailed and put all of our emails in the to field for a whole bunch of people. And I complained, and the Privacy Commissioner of Canada wrote back and said, did they say they're sorry? And I said, yes, and they said, well, that's good enough. And I'm like, it's not.
Oh, no, it's not.
That was
Yeah.
the whole thing.
Okay.
Well, they said they're sorry, so it was okay.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I had a similar story with things I had to send in email to the municipality, and well, I couldn't help but saying, well, maybe you should check your privacy practices. And then they got back a couple of days later saying like, no, it's fine. We checked, but it's okay. Like, but you can't do that via email. But apparently the lawyer said it's fine. So what are we gonna do? Yeah. No, but there needs to be more awareness on this, and the fines help. But it's mainly the mindset, the culture shift that needs to be integrated. So I'm hoping to get this more into also, it's very similar to security. So I hope that what we have learned from security, that we can leverage that, because, well, hopefully we can then fast track privacy and take everything that we've learned from security and make this privacy thing grow faster than where we should be if we fix this in isolation. Matt.
Oh, actually, somebody over there had a question.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
So along those lines, if you're in the U.S. short of moving to the EU or to Canada,
California.
Okay. Is there any way to, like, maybe some ideas on how to start a groundswell for something similar here?
Oh, that's a legal question. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know.
Lawsuits. You're gonna start lawsuits in London.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, right. It's the US lawsuits. Yes.
Okay, so
She's gonna have more money than the lawyers and
move to
Microsoft.
EU or Canada. Got it.
Yeah.
Or California.
Yeah. Yeah, Matt.
So I know a security principle that often gets overlooked is social acceptability. And I saw that you had privacy not included as a resource, which I think does or used to do look at privacy policies and understand what grade level comprehension for reading comprehension. How much of, I guess, what we were talking about here comes down to the ability for users to understand what they're getting themselves into.
Right. So the usability. So again, it's very vague on what you need to be properly informed. It needs to be understandable. There has been these things saying you need to use icons and like structure that will help people understand. Nobody actually knows what the official rules are, so people just do and wait for fines. But that's just part, right? I mean, it shouldn't come down to the consumer or the individual to say like, whoa, I'm not going to use it. No, it should be the application that should have privacy built in. It shouldn't be put on us as users as an additional job to check and complain. So yeah, that's spreading awareness and bringing this in as a security and privacy concept is hopefully the way forward. Yes?
When you're implementing privacy measures as an organization, I think you're often going against really powerful needs in the organization, right? Marketing departments, for example, they want all of them.
I know, yeah, marketing wants all, but there has been studies, especially about AI, training models, outputs, and so on, that it's much more powerful to have very targeted inputs that gives you better outputs than just throwing everything in. So I hope that we can continue those studies and the outcomes will be the same to actually show like there's no point in just collecting everything, because just think about it up front, have those specific inputs that will give you better outputs, and that means you don't have to collect everything.
So you already answered what my question was going to be a little bit, because, you know, if is the only incentive, you know, to put privacy into everything that you do, is it legal only, or are there better ideas? You know, because legal is stretched so far, right?
Yeah.
The EU is large and it can affect other countries, but, you know, and also legal, as you said, I mean, it only works on exceptional cases. The PA is going to tell you, yeah, they're sorry, you know, like.
Yeah, well, compliance, as you say, only gets you that far because it's going to be the low-hanging fruits and the easy fixes, and that's already a great starting point. I mean, as privacy people, we love GDPR entering into force because organizations were really looking into this. Better incentives, yeah, as I said, well, you have the fines, you have the reputation damage, and the way around, if you have that privacy reputation, that you will get a different audience, or that the people who are more privacy aware will come to you. I think that's great in theory, but we're all lazy, so it's not always working that way. But I think the best thing is looking at the what if or the when situation when there's something going wrong. Well, think about that. Better to fix it now to minimize, to avoid having that fallout. It's tricky because I know it's already hard to get the budget from a security perspective. This privacy thing is even trickier, but it has also good impact on security. So again, I hope to like bring it together and make it stronger together like that. So, but if you find that awesome thing that will sell that, let me know because I'm looking for it too. Yeah. All right, I think we need to get ready to go to the closing keynote. So thank you so much.